He raised him in faith, in loyalty, in fear. But something changed. At 68, Mel Gibson simply cut his son out of his life. And now, for the first time, he's admitting why. What happened between them was never meant to be public. But now, Mel is finally saying the quiet part out loud. What happened between them? Mel Gibson didn't just walk away. He slammed the door. And according to multiple sources close to the family, it wasn't in a fit of rage. It was deliberate. It was final. The son in question, Milo. Once seen as the heir to Mel's legacy, an actor, a Gibson, a believer, now quietly erased from the family's orbit. Over the past few years, Milo has been missing from family events, red carpet appearances, even social media. Those close to the situation say the silence is no accident. According to one insider, Mel made it clear. If his son chose that path, then he was choosing life without his father. So what was that path? At first glance, the rift didn't make sense. Milo Gibson, one of Mel's 9 children, had seemed like the ideal son. He stepped into acting late, only after years as a private citizen. He kept a low profile. No scandals, no headlines, and when he did enter the film world, he did it on his father's terms, starring in gritty war dramas, faith-tinged stories, and even speaking publicly about how Mel's guidance shaped his career. But behind the scenes, something was off. Friends noticed a growing distance. Milo, once deferential, began pushing back. Not in public, but in private. Over the roles he chose. Over the way Mel would insert himself into every part of his life. Over the relentless expectations to match a worldview that belonged to another generation. And then there was the faith. Mel Gibson's Catholicism isn't casual, it's rigid, unyielding, and, some would say, extreme. He built his own private chapel. He's spoken out against modern Catholic reforms. He's condemned lifestyles, identities, even fellow Catholics for deviating from his interpretation of doctrine. Inside his home, faith wasn't a topic. It was a rule book. And according to one former associate of the family, if you questioned the rules, you weren't just wrong, you were betraying him. Sources say Milo's quiet rebellion didn't begin with a dramatic confrontation. It started with small decisions, skipping Mass, refusing to baptize his child in the Latin Rite, choosing a romantic partner who didn't share Mel's religious views. From the outside, these seem like personal choices. But in the Gibson household, they were red lines. Mel, insiders say, didn't lash out immediately. He pulled back. He became colder, less involved, but more judgmental. Conversations turned into lectures, family dinners became tense, and Milo, never known for being confrontational, began to withdraw. One particularly telling moment, according to a longtime friend of the family, happened during a holiday gathering 2 years ago. Mel was trying to bless the food, but Milo wouldn't bow his head. He didn't interrupt, didn't argue, he just stared at him. That's when I knew something had changed. It wasn't just religion, it was loyalty. Mel Gibson has always valued family, but on his terms. Loyalty, obedience, and faith weren't suggestions, they were requirements. And Milo, by asserting even a modest level of independence, was crossing into forbidden territory. It wasn't about disrespect, it was about control. And Mel, as one former colleague put it, doesn't take kindly to being defied, even by blood. The final break came quietly. Milo moved out. He stopped attending events. He was removed from family group chats. When asked why, one source close to Mel said, "Mel told us, I can't have that energy around me. He's not who I raised him to be." The phrasing is telling. Not who I raised him to be. As if Milo's adulthood, his choices, his autonomy, were failures of design. Mel had built a life rooted in conviction, harsh, demanding conviction. And when one of his own stepped outside that line, there was no room for compromise. Insiders say Mel sees the situation not as a tragedy, but as a necessary boundary. He's reportedly told close friends that he did what he had to do, and that every man has to make his choices. But when asked if he missed his son, the only thing he allegedly said was, "He made his choice, so I made mine." What makes it worse, some say, is that Milo hasn't lashed out. He hasn't spoken to the press. He hasn't tried to defend himself or expose his father. He's just disappeared, quietly, respectfully, and completely. But that silence might be louder than any words, because in a family built around one man's beliefs, stepping away might have been the only way to survive. Mel Gibson's unyielding views on family and faith. Mel Gibson never pretended to be a flexible man. He didn't raise his children in a Hollywood bubble. He raised them inside a fortress of belief. At the center of that belief system was his religion. Not just Catholicism, but a version of it so rigid that even the Vatican has distanced itself from the views he holds dear. His home wasn't just a residence. According to those close to the family, it functioned more like a religious enclave. He built a private chapel on his Malibu property, complete with traditional Latin Mass and liturgies that the modern Catholic Church has long moved away from. His family prayed in Latin, confessed in Latin, lived by a code most priests would consider outdated. And the children? They were expected to follow it all, without question. Mel's worldview leaves no room for ambiguity. Marriage is sacred. Divorce is forbidden. Homosexuality, in his words, is unnatural. Women, he once said, are created to serve men, and men are called to lead. These weren't casual opinions. They were commandments inside the Gibson household. And Mel, according to those who spent time with the family, treated fatherhood more like priesthood. He was the authority, the interpreter, the judge. One former associate described it like this: Mel didn't raise kids, he raised disciples. You didn't debate him, you obeyed him. It's a worldview that doesn't age well in modern America, and even less so in Hollywood, where identity, freedom, and self-expression are currency. For a young man like Milo, trying to find his own voice, this created an impossible tightrope. Either he stayed silent and obedient, or he risked being cast out. While other actors were navigating red carpets and movie deals, Milo was navigating doctrine. Whether he believed it fully or not, insiders say there was constant pressure to present himself as the right kind of son. That meant conservative values, traditional masculinity, and full-throated support of his father's faith. Publicly, he complied. He spoke respectfully of Mel. He avoided political statements. He stayed off the gossip radar. But privately, things were shifting. Friends close to Milo describe years of building frustration. Small acts of rebellion that didn't register as hostile, but didn't go unnoticed either. Like choosing to live with a girlfriend instead of marrying her. Like questioning why his younger siblings had to attend weekly confession. Like refusing to baptize his child in the Tridentine rite, the pre-Vatican II ritual Mel insisted on. Each act on its own might seem insignificant, but in Mel's worldview, these were signs of slippage. And slippage, he believed, leads to collapse. According to a source close to the family, Mel once said, "If you compromise the foundation, the whole house falls." The tension became less about specific rules and more about identity. Milo was becoming a man who made his own choices. Mel saw that as defiance, not just of tradition, but of him. The more Milo leaned into autonomy, the more Mel doubled down on authority. This wasn't a yelling match. There were no violent confrontations, no slammed doors, just cold stares, short answers, unreturned calls. Mel didn't explode. He iced over. Friends say Milo would still show up to family events out of respect, but the warmth was gone. The father-son bond had become a silent battleground, both of them unwilling to move. What complicated everything further was the outside world. Hollywood press began taking an interest in Milo's rising career. Reporters asked about Mel's controversial past, Interviewers poked at political views, and every time Milo sidestepped the questions, or worse, brushed them off with a joke, Mel saw it as disloyalty. He thought Milo was ashamed of him, said one family friend. That's the worst thing you can be in Mel's eyes, ashamed of your own blood. Ironically, the faith Mel built his life around centers on forgiveness, mercy, redemption. But those who know him best say he doesn't extend that grace easily, not even to his children. Mel's interpretation of Catholicism is more Old Testament than New. It's about law and order, sin and punishment. So when Milo stopped following the script, Mel didn't see a son growing into himself. He saw betrayal, and in his world, betrayal demands consequences. He reportedly said, "You cannot honor God and dishonor your father." It was a statement soaked in scriptures, Tanakh, but also in personal pain, because by then it was clear Milo had chosen independence over submission, and Mel would rather lose a son than lose control. The son's life and why it clashed with Mel's world. From the outside, Mel Gibson looked like he was following in his father's footsteps. A former stuntman and private citizen turned actor, he stepped into the film world well after Mel's heyday. His first roles were low-key but pointed: war dramas, gritty indie films, and one-off action projects that echoed the themes Mel had built a career on. To the public, it looked like Mel was grooming his successor. But beneath the surface, Milo wasn't trying to become his father. He was trying to step out of his shadow. People close to the family say Milo never chased fame. He worked as an electrician for years before even considering acting, and when he did start, it wasn't through press tours or red carpet hype. It was quiet, intentional. A choice, not a calling. That's the first thing that reportedly upset Mel. In Mel's world, acting isn't a job. It is a legacy, a weapon, a pulpit. Milo's casual attitude toward it was seen as a rejection of what mattered. That attitude carried into the roles he took. Unlike his father's firebrand performances, laced with politics, religion, and masculine dominance, Milo often chose parts that were quieter, more modern. One insider noted Mel wanted him to be a warrior. Milo just wanted to act. And that gap between expectation and reality kept growing. What made it worse for Mel, according to sources close to the situation, was how Milo handled the spotlight. He didn't lean into the Gibson name. He didn't correct interviewers when they glossed over his father's legacy. In fact, in several public appearances, he downplayed the connection altogether. At a 2018 premiere, when asked what advice Mel had given him about acting, Milo replied, "Just show up on time." No praise, no mention of mentorship, just a brush-off that reportedly stung. To some, it was a harmless line, but to Mel it felt like erasure. Family friends say the deeper issue was Milo's refusal to defend his father publicly. When past controversies around Mel's behavior resurfaced, the infamous audio tapes, the anti-Semitic rants, the domestic violence allegations, Milo stayed silent. He didn't condemn him, but he didn't rush to his defense either. And for Mel, silence was betrayal. He expected loyalty, said one source, and what he got was neutrality. That neutrality showed up in other parts of Milo's life. He refused to involve himself in Mel's religious projects. He kept his romantic relationship out of the Catholic structure Mel imposed on the rest of the family. He lived in Los Angeles, not on the family estate. And over time, those decisions added up, not as choices, but as statements. There was a time when Mel spoke about family as a fortress, something you protect, defend, and preserve at all costs. But Milo wasn't interested in preserving the fortress. He was interested in living, and that meant disagreeing with the walls his father had built around their name. Milo embraced the Hollywood that Mel rejected. He didn't grandstand about masculinity, religion, or politics. He joked in interviews. He wore modern clothes, not traditional suits. He spoke freely, not in sound bites. He lived like a young man in California, not like a foot soldier in his father's army. And that, according to those who know Mel well, was the beginning of the end. "He couldn't control him," said one insider, "and that scared him. Mel doesn't know how to handle being ignored." Mel reportedly tried subtle ways to pull Milo back in. Invites to projects, religious lectures, encouragement to take better roles. But nothing worked. And when Milo declined to appear at a private family gathering last year, one tied to a religious milestone, Mel saw it as the final confirmation. His son wasn't drifting, he was walking away. Those close to Milo say he never intended to sever ties. But he also couldn't keep shrinking himself to fit inside someone else's beliefs. Especially when those beliefs came with pressure, judgment, and emotional manipulation. And that's where the break happened, not in a fight, but in a refusal. Refusal to attend church, refusal to speak on command, refusal to perform the version of sonhood Mel demanded. It wasn't one decision, it was all of them. The interviews that ignored Mel, the partner who wasn't approved, the lifestyle that didn't include Sunday Mass or rigid discipline. One former family employee said, "It's like he just stopped pretending." And once he did, Mel stopped calling. Mel Gibson's history of control, rage, and estrangement. The estrangement between Mel Gibson and his son didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't surprising to those who have watched Mel's life unfold in the public eye. If anything, this quiet, bitter fallout with Milo fits a pattern. One that has followed Mel for decades. Explosive anger. Control disguised as conviction. Loyalty demanded, but rarely returned. That's not new. That's who Mel has always been. The world first got a glimpse of it in 2010, when leaked phone recordings between Mel and his then-partner Oksana Grigorieva made headlines around the world. The voice on the tapes wasn't the charismatic movie star. It was someone else entirely, panting with rage, hurling threats, racial slurs, and pure venom. At one point, he told her she deserved to be assaulted. At another, he promised she would burn. And those weren't rumors. They were recordings. In court, Mel pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor battery charge. He never denied the tapes were real. He claimed they were edited, but the damage was done. The public heard the raw, unfiltered anger, the possessiveness, the obsession with being obeyed. And while the headlines eventually faded, those who knew him or lived under his roof already recognized that version of him. It was just the first time everyone else did too. Sources close to the family say Mel's fury was never just for strangers or ex-partners. It showed up in his home. One insider who spent years working with the Gibson family described the atmosphere as tense on good days, explosive on bad ones. Mel wasn't physically violent toward his children, they said, but he didn't need to be. His voice could do enough damage. One raised eyebrow could silence a room. One long stare could make a grown adult feel like a child. Control was everything, and when he lost it, even for a second, the rage came fast. In one incident, a family member jokingly mocked one of Mel's old films. The joke wasn't cruel, it wasn't even serious, but Mel went cold. He didn't speak for the rest of the night. And by morning, that family member was gone, sent home early from what was supposed to be a week-long visit. According to the assistant, Mel later told someone else, "If you don't respect me, you don't belong here." That's the line that echoes again and again in his life. You don't belong here. It has followed him through friendships, marriages, creative partnerships, and now through fatherhood. Mel doesn't ghost people, he exiles them. He chooses silence not as an escape, but as a punishment. His disappearances are deliberate. His shutouts are strategic. When someone crosses a line, even slightly, he doesn't confront. He cuts off. He makes them invisible. And perhaps the cruelest part is how quietly it happens. No warning, no fight, just a cold goodbye that no one hears. This has happened to directors, to co-stars, to family friends, and, reportedly, to some of his own children. Though many of Mel's kids have remained out of the public eye, there are clues. Long gaps without being seen together. Names left out of interviews. Entire branches of the family tree that rarely intersect in photos or events. It doesn't mean he hates them, but in Mel's world, absence often speaks louder than words. Also, if there's one thing that defines Mel Gibson's public and private persona, it's control. Control over his films, his image, his religion, his family. When things go well, that control can look like leadership. But when it slips, when someone pushes back, it turns into domination. And Milo pushed back. Not with rebellion, not with accusations. Just by becoming his own man. And in Mel's eyes, that was enough. What sets the fallout with Milo apart is that this wasn't a short-term blow-up. It was a long buildup of unsaid things. Mel didn't scream this time. He didn't make a scene. He just made a decision. Quietly. And if you've followed the history, that silence was the loudest move of all. Because this is a man who has shown the world what he looks like when he's angry. But what may be worse, and more permanent, is what he becomes when he's disappointed. With Milo, it wasn't a betrayal. It wasn't a public scandal. It was a son saying no, quietly, and for the last time. And for a man like Mel, that may have been the greatest defiance of all. For a man as loud and defiant as Mel Gibson, the most telling part of this fallout might be what hasn't happened. No public statement, no clarification, no carefully crafted interview to set the record straight. Just silence. And if you follow the trail, from family photos to red carpet appearances to quiet whispers in the press, that silence starts to look permanent. Insiders close to the family say that since the final break, there has been no meaningful attempt at reconciliation. No private meetings, no mediated conversations, not even a simple phone call. The rift, according to one source, isn't a cold war, it's just cold. They live in the same city, work in the same industry, but they move like strangers, intentional, separate. Milo has not spoken publicly about the estrangement, but what he hasn't said may speak louder than anything he could. He has not been seen at Mel's last 3 film premieres. He hasn't been spotted at family holidays. He no longer follows his father's production company on social media. And while some of Mel's children still appear in group photos, Milo is never among them. In Hollywood, where nothing stays private forever, this kind of absence is impossible to ignore. Sources say Mel views the fallout not as a tragedy, but as a necessary boundary. According to one longtime associate, he's been overheard describing it as a line that had to be drawn. Not in anger, not in regret, just fact. He thinks he gave Milo every chance, the associate said, but he also thinks Milo walked away first. That framing matters. Because for Mel Gibson, being the one left behind would be unacceptable. He would rather be the one who closed the door than the one staring at it from the outside. Even those close to Mel admit that, while he talks about family often, his version of family is rigid, structured, hierarchical. He's the center, the guide, and when someone stops orbiting him, he cuts the cord. Privately, some friends believe Mel has moments of doubt. They say he keeps a photo of Milo in his home office, that he sometimes asks how Milo is doing without really waiting for an answer, that he still refers to him in the present tense, even though they haven't spoken in months. But when pushed, he brushes it off. "It is what it is," he reportedly told one colleague. "Some things don't fix themselves." No trail back home. If there's one thing both sides seem to agree on, it's this: there is no active bridge being rebuilt. Not now, not quietly, not even in theory. The people who once tried to mediate, mutual friends, family members, even former co-workers, have stopped. They say Mel isn't open to it, and Milo isn't asking. The pain isn't public. It's quiet. But the message is clear. This isn't a father waiting for his son to return. This is a man who has already closed that chapter. At least, in the version of the story he tells himself. The irony is brutal. Mel built an empire on stories about sacrifice, loyalty, and redemption. On screen, he's the man who would die for his family, who would cross oceans, endure torture, suffer loss, just to bring his people home. But in real life, the ending may be simpler, colder, realer. No reunion, no third-act redemption, just distance and silence. Mel Gibson has built a legacy on screen, a warrior, a rebel, a father figure. But behind the scenes, he may have lost something more permanent than a role or reputation. He lost his son. Not in one night, not in one fight, but in a slow unraveling that no camera ever caught. Fathers and sons argue. They disagree. But not every disagreement ends in exile. And at 68, Mel isn't making peace. He isn't reaching out. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because in Mel Gibson's world, loyalty is everything. And once it's broken, there's no coming back.